Samuel Hayward had always believed that trust was the foundation of a strong marriage. But trust can be shattered in an instant. One discovery, one piece of undeniable proof, and everything he thought he knew about his life collapsed like a house of cards. The low hum of an incoming message vibrated across the wooden desk, pulling Samuel from his late evening paperwork. He glanced at the notification on his phone. A brief note from his wife, Eleanor, about an upcoming medical symposium in Denver. He exhaled slowly, thoughts already drifting toward the project he had been meaning to complete. With Eleanor out of town, he could finally redecorate their bedroom, a gesture he hoped would show his appreciation. By the time he returned home from the hardware store, the car was packed with supplies, fresh paint, curtains, and the chandelier she had admired. He wasted no time preparing the space, moving furniture, rolling up rugs, and taping off the edges of the walls. As he reached the back of Eleanor's closet, something unusual caught his eye. A small, unmarked shoebox pushed far into the corner. He hesitated for only a moment before pulling it out. The weight of the box was unexpected. Lifting the lid, he anticipated old mementos or sentimental trinkets. Instead, a stack of letters greeted him, all signed with a single initial, J. Beneath them, a collection of photographs, showing Eleanor with a man he had never seen before. The closeness between them left no room for doubt. His pulse quickened as he sifted further. 2 prepaid phones, both appearing in used yet fully charged. And at the bottom, a handwritten note outlining something chilling, a plan to ensure Hayward was handled permanently. The air seemed heavier, pressing against his lungs. He sat on the edge of the bed, turning over the evidence in his trembling hands. He had never doubted Eleanor's loyalty. Now, every assumption crumbled beneath the weight of cold reality. His first impulse was to confront her, demand answers. But logic quickly overruled emotion. If there was any truth to this sinister plan, revealing his knowledge could be dangerous. He needed time, clarity, a way to proceed without putting himself at risk. With a deep breath, he reached for his phone and typed out a message to Nathan Caldwell. The response was immediate, a simple acknowledgement. 20 minutes later, Samuel was sitting in a dimly lit corner of an empty bar, the shoebox placed carefully on the table in front of him. Nathan arrived, scanning the items methodically. The letters, the photos, the note, all pieced together a reality that was both damning and terrifying. He studied the contents in silence before slowly exhaling. Samuel watched as his friend's expression hardened, the weight of the situation settling between them. No words were necessary. The implications were clear. Samuel knew the next step. He needed undeniable proof. If he acted too soon, Eleanor could manipulate the situation. A private investigator was the logical course. Someone to track her movements, uncover the truth, and ensure there was no room for misinterpretation. As they left the bar, a cold determination settled in his chest. Whatever Eleanor and this mysterious Jay were planning, he would uncover every detail. And he would be ready. Over the next few days, Samuel could barely function at work. His thoughts were consumed by questions, by paranoia. Every moment Eleanor spent on the phone made his stomach tighten. He pretended nothing was wrong, keeping his daily routine intact, but inside, the pressure built with every passing hour. At night, sleep became an impossible task. He lay awake, staring at the ceiling, running through every possibility. Was she planning this alone? Was there more to uncover? He scoured their financial records, combed through Eleanor's emails when she wasn't looking, searching for anything else that might reveal the depth of her deception. He found bank withdrawals that didn't add up, unexplained expenses that pointed to something far larger than just an affair. The more he uncovered, the more convinced he became that he was running out of time. He needed a plan, and he needed it fast. With resolve settling deep in his bones, Samuel knew one thing. This wasn't over. The truth was just beginning to unravel. Samuel's mind remained restless, his thoughts consumed by the shoebox's contents. Every detail replayed in his head. Eleanor's intimate letters, the damning photographs, the chilling note that left no room for doubt. He had to act, but he needed to be careful. If Eleanor truly had plans to eliminate him, One wrong step could trigger something irreversible. The following morning, he woke with a clarity he hadn't felt in days. He needed someone who could help him make sense of this, someone with experience in uncovering secrets. After hours of searching online, he found a name, Madeline Hartman, a private investigator with a reputation for discretion and results. He hesitated before dialing, but his resolve solidified when he thought about the note. The voice on the other end was calm and professional. Madeline agreed to meet him that evening in a quiet cafe on the outskirts of town. Samuel spent the day pretending to be normal, going through the motions of his usual routine. He avoided Eleanor as much as possible, keeping his interactions brief and neutral. Even the simple act of having breakfast together felt like walking through a minefield, his every word measured, his every movement controlled. Eleanor, oblivious to his inner turmoil, carried on as if nothing had changed. By the time the evening rolled around, he found himself seated in a dimly lit corner of the cafe, the shoebox resting beside him. When Madeline arrived, she carried herself with quiet confidence, her sharp eyes taking in everything. Samuel explained the situation as clearly as he could, watching her expression shift from intrigue to concern. She flipped through the photographs, read over a few of the letters, and studied the note with a practiced eye. Her fingers tapped the table lightly as she processed the information. "This isn't just an affair," she finally said, voice measured. "This is calculated. And if this note means what I think it does, you're in serious danger." Samuel had already known that, but hearing it confirmed by someone with experience sent a chill down his spine. The weight of the situation pressed against his chest like a vice. He had spent years building a life with Eleanor, believing in their bond, only to discover he was nothing more than an obstacle to be removed. Madeline laid out the plan. First, she would start by tracking Eleanor's movements, gathering solid evidence of her activities. Samuel needed to remain as normal as possible, giving no indication that he suspected anything. Any shift in behavior could alert Eleanor and her accomplice, potentially escalating the situation. Over the next few days, Madeline provided him with updates. Eleanor's routine appeared normal at first: work, errands, dinner at home. But then there were deviations: late-night phone calls, meetings with a man matching the description of the one in the photographs, cash withdrawals in increasingly large amounts. Each detail built upon the last, painting a picture that became harder to ignore. Samuel barely slept, his nerves stretched to their limit. He found himself checking doors and windows repeatedly, second-guessing his every action. One night, Madeline called him with an update that made his stomach drop. Eleanor booked a cabin in the mountains. 2 guests. Check-in is set for next week. Samuel gripped the phone tighter. "And the name of the other guest?" "She used yours." The room spun. The pieces fell into place with sickening clarity. Whatever Eleanor and this unknown man were planning, it was about to happen. And if he didn't do something soon, he might not get the chance to stop it. His hands clenched into fists. This wasn't just about uncovering an affair anymore. This was about survival. He opened his laptop, his fingers shaking as he searched for legal advice. He needed options, ways to protect himself legally and physically. Every second that passed felt like another step toward a trap he couldn't escape. The paranoia consumed him. At night, he lay awake listening for the faintest noise in the house. Was Eleanor already moving against him? Had she realized he knew? The fear was suffocating, but with it came an icy determination. He wouldn't wait for her to strike first. He would be ready. With a deep breath, Samuel made a decision. He would turn the tables. He would gather the proof he needed, expose Eleanor and her lover, and ensure they were the ones who paid the price. Because if he didn't, there might not be another chance. Samuel knew that time was running out. The discovery of Eleanor's plan had shifted everything, leaving him in a constant state of vigilance. The house, once a place of comfort, now felt suffocating. He moved through each room like a ghost, watching Eleanor for any sign that she suspected his awareness. She remained the same, smiling over breakfast, scrolling through her phone at night, whispering on calls when she thought he wasn't listening. It was a performance, and he knew it. Madeline continued her surveillance, uncovering more evidence that confirmed Samuel's worst fears. The man Eleanor had been meeting was not just a lover. He was a calculated partner in their scheme. Financial records showed that Eleanor had been draining their shared accounts, moving funds to offshore locations. She was preparing for a life without him, one where he was no longer an obstacle. Samuel couldn't sit idle any longer. He needed something definitive, something that would expose them both. Madeline provided him with a listening device, small enough to be concealed in Eleanor's handbag. It was risky but necessary. That evening, while Eleanor was in the shower, he carefully unzipped the side pocket of her purse and slid the device inside. His hands trembled, but he forced himself to focus. Days passed, and Samuel clung to routine. He worked, ate dinner with Eleanor, played his role. At night, he reviewed the recordings Madeline sent him, listening to Eleanor's hushed conversations. The details emerged slowly, but unmistakably. Eleanor and her accomplice were refining their plan. They spoke in vague terms, but the intent was clear. Samuel's life was a problem that needed solving. The cabin trip was their deadline. Each night, sleep became harder to come by. His mind raced with possibilities. The police would require more than just suspicion. He needed undeniable proof. The offshore accounts, the photographs, the recordings, it was close, but not enough. Then, one evening, Madeline called with a breakthrough. "I have a recorded conversation from earlier today," she said. "You need to hear this." Samuel's heart pounded as he played the file. Eleanor's voice was unmistakable. "Once we get to the cabin, it has to be clean. No mistakes." His breath hitched. A deep male voice responded, "Are you sure he suspects nothing?" "He's clueless," Eleanor replied with a slight laugh. "By the time they find him, we'll be long gone." The words were a death sentence. Samuel's stomach twisted. There was no longer any question. If he went on that trip, he would not return. He shut off the recording, his mind racing. The proof was there. He had to act before they did. He called Madeline back, his voice steady despite the storm inside him. "We go to the police. Now." The game had changed. Samuel was no longer waiting to be a victim. He was taking control. Samuel's decision to go to the police set everything into motion. Within hours, he and Madeline sat across from Detective Robert Gaines in a sterile, dimly lit interrogation room. The detective, a man with sharp eyes and a weary expression, listened intently as Samuel laid out everything: Eleanor's affair, the offshore accounts, and most crucially, the recorded conversation planning his murder. Gaines didn't interrupt. He took notes, nodding occasionally, but his face betrayed nothing. When Samuel finished, the detective leaned forward, clasping his hands together on the table. "This is serious," Gaines finally said, his tone grave. "We're not just talking about a financial crime here. We're talking about conspiracy to commit murder." Samuel swallowed hard, as if hearing the words made it even more real. "What do we do now?" he asked. The detective exhaled through his nose, thinking, "We need them to incriminate themselves further. If we move too soon, they could spin this into something else. Claim you've fabricated the evidence, especially given your connection to the accounts. But if we let them go through with their plan, just enough to confirm intent, we can get them on more solid charges." Madeline crossed her arms. "You want Samuel to go along with it?" "No," Gaines replied firmly. "But we need to stage this carefully. Make them believe they're in control. Let them make the final move, so we have no doubt about their intentions." Samuel hesitated, the weight of the plan settling over him. He had spent days pretending nothing was wrong, but this was different. He wasn't just playing along. He was walking into a carefully laid trap, one that could still go wrong in countless ways. The plan was set. Undercover officers would be stationed at the cabin, waiting for Eleanor and her accomplice to make their move. Surveillance was arranged, hidden cameras planted, and Samuel was equipped with a concealed panic button. Everything was designed to capture Eleanor's betrayal in its final, irreversible act. The following day, Samuel packed a small bag, keeping up the illusion. Eleanor smiled at him over breakfast, her demeanor unchanged. She kissed him lightly, as if the next 24 hours weren't meant to be his last. As they drove toward the secluded cabin, Samuel's pulse pounded in his ears. Eleanor hummed softly beside him, her hands relaxed on the steering wheel. It was chilling, the way she could maintain such a facade. He played his part, making casual conversation, but every moment brought them closer to the inevitable confrontation. Upon arrival, the air was thick with tension. The cabin sat in eerie silence, the surrounding woods dark and foreboding. Eleanor acted normal, but Samuel saw the way her eyes darted, as if confirming something. He kept his composure, feigning exhaustion as he stepped inside. Minutes passed, each one stretching unbearably long. Then a sound, a car pulling up. Eleanor's entire demeanor shifted. She turned toward the door just as it opened, revealing her accomplice. "Right on time," the man said, his voice a low murmur. He stepped inside, gaze settling on Samuel with something cold and final. Eleanor exhaled, tension draining from her shoulders. "We should get this over with." Samuel's fingers tightened around the panic button hidden in his pocket. Then, the room exploded with movement. The door burst open, officers flooding in with weapons drawn. Shouts filled the air as Eleanor and her partner were slammed against the wall, their shock giving way to fury. Samuel barely moved, exhaling a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. Detective Gaines stepped forward, his expression unreadable. "You planned to kill your husband," he said flatly. "And now we have proof." Eleanor's eyes met Samuel's. For the first time, her facade cracked. But there was no regret, no apology, only anger being caught. Samuel stood as the officers hauled her away, his pulse still unsteady. He had spent so long preparing for this moment, but now that it had arrived, he felt strangely empty. The nightmare was over, but the next chapter of his life was only beginning. In the days following Eleanor's arrest, Samuel found himself trapped in a surreal limbo. The weight of what had happened still pressed heavily on his chest, yet the danger was gone. The house, once filled with quiet dread, now felt empty in a way that unsettled him. The echoes of the past still lurked in every room, in every memory of a life he had thought was real. The police had enough evidence to ensure Eleanor and her accomplice would face the full force of the law. The charges were serious: conspiracy to commit murder, fraud, and financial crimes. Samuel sat through legal proceedings, listening as the details of Eleanor's betrayal were laid out in cold, factual statements. The recorded conversations, the offshore accounts, the false alibis. Every piece of deception was brought to light. He should have felt satisfaction. Instead, he felt exhausted. The trial stretched on for weeks, a slow unraveling of everything Eleanor had built in secret. Samuel attended each session, sitting quietly as lawyers debated over evidence, as witnesses recounted details that felt too personal, too raw. He was called to the stand, his voice steady despite the emotional storm raging inside him. He recounted what had happened: the shoebox, the discovery, the night at the cabin. His words painted a picture of a man who had been betrayed, who had walked to the edge of death and survived. The jury reached a verdict sooner than expected: guilty on all counts. Samuel watched as Eleanor stood motionless, absorbing the judgment. She did not look at him. The woman he had once loved was gone, replaced by a stranger who had plotted his end. When she was led away in handcuffs, he felt neither relief nor sorrow, only the quiet certainty that this chapter of his life was finally over. But what came next? For weeks, Samuel drifted. He avoided the house as much as possible, taking long drives with no destination, stopping at coffee shops where no one knew his name. He needed space to think, to understand what his life meant now that Eleanor was no longer in it. Friends reached out, some offering sympathy, others stunned by the ordeal he had endured. He responded to most with short reassurances, but deeper conversations felt impossible. Madeline checked in periodically, her voice steady and reassuring. She had been instrumental in uncovering the truth, and yet she never pressed him for closure. Instead, she offered something else: normalcy. It was in one of their conversations, over a quiet lunch at a small cafe, that Samuel finally admitted what had been gnawing at him. "I don't know who I am without all of this," he said, stirring his coffee absent-mindedly. "For months, I lived with the fear of being killed. Now that it's over, I feel like I should be relieved, but I'm just lost." Madeline nodded, giving him a moment before responding. "That's normal. Trauma doesn't just disappear when the threat is gone. You spent so long fighting to survive. Now you have to figure out how to live again. Her words stayed with him. The idea of rebuilding felt daunting, but he couldn't live in the shadow of Eleanor's betrayal forever. He needed to reclaim his life, to find a purpose beyond the chaos she had left behind. With time, Samuel began to take small steps forward. He sold the house, unwilling to live within the walls that had held so many secrets. He took a leave from work, using the time to travel, to breathe, to exist without constantly looking over his shoulder. One evening, as he watched the sun dip below the horizon from a quiet lakeside retreat, he realized something. He had survived. He had been deceived, hunted, and nearly killed, but he was still here. That meant something. The past would always be a part of him, but it did not have to define him. For the first time in months, Samuel allowed himself to think about the future. Not the one he had once imagined with Eleanor, but something new, something unknown. And for the first time, the uncertainty did not scare him. It felt like freedom,